Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks, and in this bulletin, we'll get you a roundup on stories developing all over the world. First up, the day's top headlines. Top Pentagon leaders are all set to face another round of tough questions on the botched Afghanistan troop withdrawal. A second day of testimony on Capitol Hill begins shortly. President Biden postpones a trip to Chicago to stay in Washington and fight for his domestic agenda. A $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill and an even bigger social spending package, both are at risk in the divided Congress. Former Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida is all set to become the country's next Prime Minister. This after he won his party's leadership election, defeating popular vaccine minister Taro Kono to take the top spot. Outgoing German Chancellor Angela Merkel congratulates SPD leader Olaf Scholz on his election victory, even as the CDU leader and her anointed successor Armin Laschet continues to claim that he's making ongoing efforts to form a government. Amid intense protests over his power grab, Tunisia's president names Nalia Bouden as the country's first female prime minister and asks her to form a government.
This is an appalling episode in Australia's international affairs, and the consequences of it will endure to our disadvantage for a very long time.
Strong words from the former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who signed the now cancelled French submarine deal and is now questioning the AUKUS pact, asking whether Australia can safely maintain a fleet powered by US nuclear technology.
Is it true that we actually did tabletop exercises and we never assumed that there could be an immediate collapse of the Afghan government?
We poured money and support and air cover, and the Afghan government continued to fail.
The situation was deteriorating rapidly. By July, why wasn't action taken to secure the Kabul airport?
Once President Biden made the decision to have U.S. forces leave the country, who designed the evacuation?
Worst of all, 13 brave Americans were killed in the evacuation.
We told our interpreters, our driver, that we would not abandon them, and that's exactly what we did.
But if all this is true, General Milley, why haven't you resigned?
Well, that was day one. This is day two of testimony on the Biden administration's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. This time, top Pentagon officials will give their testimonies on the other side of Capitol Hill before the House of Representatives Armed Services Committee. It has 59 members, all eager to question Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and the head of U.S. Central Command, General Frank McKenzie. They will deliver their opening statements shortly. On Tuesday, they testified at a Senate hearing. Here are some of the main takeaways from that session. The first, the Pentagon maintained that the Taliban was and is a terror group. This raises questions on the US State Department's official stance vis-à-vis future recognition or limited diplomatic dealings with the Taliban. Secondly, the general said that the Taliban have not broken their ties to al-Qaeda, despite the 2020 Doha Agreement specifically committing the insurgent group to severing its ties with terror organizations like ISIS Khorasan and al-Qaeda. The Pentagon warned that those links are still intact. The generals admitted that the threat of a reconstituted al-Qaeda is very real. It could take place, they said, within the next 12 to 36 months. They also hinted at the possibility of more attacks by al-Qaeda and ISIS-Khorasan.
A reconstituted al-Qaeda or ISIS with aspirations to attack the United States is a very real possibility. And those conditions, to include activity in ungoverned spaces, could present themselves in the next 12 to 36 months. That mission will be much harder now, but not impossible, and we will continue to protect the American people.
Thirdly, the Pentagon wanted to retain a small military presence in Afghanistan. General Mark Milley had proposed keeping 2,500 troops in the country. The CENTCOM commander, General Mackenzie, was also in favour of maintaining a military presence. The testimony of both of America's top generals directly contradicted what President Biden said in a television interview in mid-August, saying at the time that he wasn't given the option of keeping troops in Afghanistan after the withdrawal deadline. The Doha agreement was also in focus, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin saying that President Biden saw no future or progress with the Doha talks.
We helped build a state, Mr. Chairman, but we could not forge a nation. The fact that the Afghan army that we and our partners trained simply melted away, in many cases without firing a shot, took us all by surprise, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. We need to consider some uncomfortable truths. That we didn't fully comprehend the depth of corruption and poor leadership in the senior ranks.
Another key takeaway was the first public evidence of a rift between the Pentagon and members of the US military, with General Milley admitting that the US credibility had taken a hit internationally as a result of the botched withdrawal operation, but Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin maintaining America's credibility on the world stage was solid and intact. But the Pentagon chief did admit lapses in the US over-the-horizon intelligence capabilities, which resulted in a drone strike last month, killing 10 innocent civilians in Kabul. Let's take you now live to the House of Representatives Armed Services Committee. That second day of testimony is getting underway now, with an opening statement coming from the chairman of the committee, Congressman Adam Smith of Washington State.
That's what he said. Not that no one presented that option. That option didn't exist in reality, and no one presented it. The president, in fact, made it clear earlier in that same interview that, yes, some of his military leaders had said that we should keep 2,500 troops there. What he said was none of them said that we could do it in a stable, peaceful environment. And that is the key point. The other key point is, and I know a lot of energy will be expended today trying to get these gentlemen to admit that they didn't agree with the president's decision. First of all, I'd never engage in that exercise because I believe the president, Democrat, Republican, no matter who it is, deserves the unabridged advice of his or her commanders. I mean, you can't give that if you're then going to have to go out in public and talk about it. But second of all, the president is the one in charge. This is ultimately what civilian control of the military means. And what I believe is, I believe certainly there were military commanders who said, nope, we should stick it out, we should keep the 2,500 there. I think they were wrong, and so did the president. It's not that they didn't make the advice, it's that they were wrong. This committee has an enormous amount of respect for our military leadership. That does not mean that the military leadership is incapable of being wrong. And over the course of the last 20 years in Afghanistan, I would have thought we would have learned that lesson. President Biden had the courage to finally make the decision to say, no, we are not succeeding in this mission. Placing more American lives at risk will not change that. If we could credibly say, if we just stuck it out for another year, another 5, another 10, and got to a better result, that'd be a difficult call. Was that worth the risk? But we can't credibly say that. So we would have been putting American lives at risk for a mission that we had to know was not achievable. The president made the right call on that. There is the issue of how we withdrew. And I will say, and I've been critical of this, I think the effort to get the SIVs and the others who wanted to get out of Afghanistan certainly could have been handled better and could have been started sooner. It certainly seemed rushed, and I want to hear from our leaders today about how that played out. But again, let's remember that the other alternative was not easy. The alternative of let's start pulling people out sooner, the Ghani government, the government that was in charge of Afghanistan at the time we would have been doing this, was adamantly opposed to us pulling all of the military equipment and hundreds of thousands of their Afghan supporters out for obvious reasons. How would we have done that against the objection of the existing Afghan government while the Taliban were rolling across the countryside? It would not have been easy, no matter how it was done. But we do deserve an accounting for how those decisions were made forward. I think today is an excellent opportunity to do that. I look forward to the questions and answers as well as the testimony of our witnesses. And with that, I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And while I have great admiration for my friend, the chairman, I could not disagree more with his observations about Afghanistan and the president's decision. The fact is, our coalition partners and our military leadership felt that we should have maintained our 2,500 troops there, along with this roughly 7,500 to 8,000 coalition troops, and the thousands of contractors that the Afghan army was dependent upon to fight successfully. And I think they could have continued, as they have in past years, to fight valiantly had we given that support and the president had listened to his general's advice. But regardless of how you feel about the decision to remove troops from Afghanistan, I think we can all agree that the withdrawal was an unmitigated disaster. Hundreds of Americans were left behind, thousands of Afghan allies stuck with little hope of escape, potentially billions worth of U.S.-provided military equipment now in the hands of the Taliban, thousands of hardened al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists freed from prisons, 10 innocent Afghans, including 7 children, killed in a botched airstrike. But worst of all, 13 brave Americans, service members, were murdered by a coward in a suicide vest. What's more infuriating is that all this could have been avoided if the president had a plan. In briefings and hearings since April, we've demanded to know a plan to A, safely evacuate Americans and Afghan allies, and B, conduct counterterrorism operations. For 4 months, the response from the Biden administration was, we're working on it. Now it's clear they never had a plan. The president repeatedly assured the American people that the Taliban takeover was not inevitable, that we had plenty of time to safely evacuate Americans and Afghan allies, that this was not going to be a fall like Saigon. As late as August 19th, the president promised us that if there's an American citizen left, we're going to stay to get them all out. Now it's clear the president has misled us more than once. On August 31st, hundreds of Americans left behind, the 13 service members murdered. The president stood in the East Room of the White House and called the withdrawal, quote, an extraordinary success, close quote. I fear the president is delusional. This wasn't an extraordinary success. It was an extraordinary disaster. It will go down in history as one of the greatest failures of American leadership. We're here today to get answers on how the hell this happened. I expect our witnesses to give us an honest accounting of exactly what went wrong. I also want answers on how we're going to conduct counterterrorism operations now that we have zero presence in Afghanistan. This was the first question we asked you in April, and we still don't have an answer. According to the latest intelligence assessment, it could be as little as 12 months before al-Qaeda will use Afghanistan as a base to conduct airstrikes or strikes against the United States, and that's unacceptable. And this talk of over-the-horizon capability is a farce. Sure, we can send a drone out to take out a terrorist, but we didn't know where the terrorists are. Without persistent ISR capabilities or reliable intelligence on the ground, that's impossible. We have neither of those now. It doesn't help that we need to fly that drone nearly 1,600 miles to reach Afghanistan, leaving little time on station, or that we have to fly over Pakistan, an ally of the Taliban, who could revoke overflight privileges at any time. None of this is giving us much confidence that this administration can successfully conduct counterterrorism in Afghanistan. We want to know what capabilities we need, where they will be based, and how they'll be used. In other words, we want to see a plan, and we want to see it today. Because frankly, after this debacle of a withdrawal, I don't think anyone can trust anything this president says about Afghanistan. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Secretary, you are recognized.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our recent drawdown and evacuation operations in Afghanistan. I'm pleased to be joined by Generals Milley and McKenzie, who I know will be able to provide you with additional context. I am incredibly proud of the men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces who conducted themselves with tremendous skill and professionalism throughout the war, the drawdown, and the evacuation. Over the course of our nation's longest war, 2,461 of our fellow Americans made the ultimate sacrifice, along with more than 20,000 who still bear the wounds of war, some of which cannot be seen on the outside. Now, we can discuss and debate the decisions, the policies, and the turning points since April of this year, when the President made clear his intent to end American involvement in this war. And we can debate the decisions over the last 20 years that led us to this point. But the one thing not open to debate is the courage and compassion of our service members, who, along with their families, served and sacrificed to ensure that our homeland would never again be attacked the way it was on September 11, 2001. I had the chance to speak with many of them during my trip to the Gulf region a few weeks ago, including the Marines who lost 11 of their teammates at the Abbey Gate in Kabul on the 26th of August. I've never been more humbled and inspired. They are rightfully proud of what they accomplished and the lives they saved in such a short period of time. The reason that our troops were able to get there so quickly is because we planned for just such a contingency. We began thinking about the possibilities for a non-combatant evacuation as far back as this spring. By late April, 2 weeks after the President's decision, military planners had crafted a number of evacuation scenarios. In mid-May, I ordered CENTCOM to make preparations for a potential non-combatant evacuation operation. And 2 weeks later, I began pre-positioning forces in the region to include 3 infantry battalions. On the 10th of August, we ran another tabletop exercise around a non-combatant evacuation scenario. We wanted to be ready, and we were. By the time that the State Department called for the NEO, significant numbers of additional forces had already arrived in Afghanistan, including leading elements of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, who were already on the ground in Kabul. Before that weekend was out, another 3,000 or so ground troops had arrived, including elements of the 82nd Airborne. To be clear, those first 2 days were difficult. We all watched with alarm the images of Afghans rushing the runway in our aircraft. We all remember the scene of confusion outside.
Sorry, we'll get that under control. Go ahead, sir.
Outside the airport, but within 48 hours, our troops restored order and the process began to take hold. Our soldiers, airmen, and Marines, in partnership with our allies, our partners, and our State Department colleagues, secured the gates, took control of the airport operations, and set up a processing system for the tens of thousands of people that they would be manifesting onto airplanes. They and our commanders exceeded all expectations. We plan to evacuate between 70,000 and 80,000 people. They evacuated more than 124,000 people. We plan to move between 5,000 and 9,000 people per day, and on average, they move slightly more than 7,000 people per day. On military aircraft alone, we flew more than 387 sorties, averaging nearly 23 per day. And at the height of this operation, an aircraft was taking off every 45 minutes. And not a single sortie was missed for maintenance, fuel, or logistical problems. It was the largest airlift conducted in U.S. history, and it was executed in just 17 days. Was it perfect? Of course not. And about how to rapidly screen, process, and manifest large numbers of people. Nothing like this has ever been done before, and no other military in the world could have pulled it off. And I think that that's crucial. And I know that members of this committee will have questions on many things, such as why we turned over Bagram Airfield, and how real our over-the-horizon capability is, and why we didn't start evacuation sooner, and why we didn't stay longer to get more people out. So let me take each in turn. Retaining Bagram would have required putting as many as 5,000 U.S. troops in harm's way just to operate and defend it. And it would have contributed little to the mission that we had been assigned, and that was to protect and defend the embassy, which was some 30 miles away. And that distance from Kabul also rendered Bagram of little value in the evacuation. So staying at Bagram, even for counterterrorism purposes, meant staying at war in Afghanistan, something that the President made clear that he would not do. And as for over-the-horizon operations, when we use that term, we refer to assets and target analysis that come from outside the country in which the operation occurs. These are effective and fairly common operations. And just days ago, we conducted one such strike in Syria, eliminating a senior al-Qaeda figure. Over-the-horizon operations are difficult, but absolutely possible. And the intelligence that supports them comes from a variety of sources and not just U.S. boots on the ground. As for when we started evacuations, we offered input to the State Department's decision, mindful of their concerns that moving too soon might actually cause the very collapse of the Afghan government that we all wanted to avoid, and that moving too late would put our people and our operations at greater risk. As I said, the fact that our troops were on the ground so quickly is due in large part to our planning and prepositioning of forces. As for the mission's end, my judgment remains that extending beyond the end of August would have greatly imperiled our people and our mission. The Taliban made clear that their cooperation would end on the 1st of September. And as you know, we faced grave and growing threats from ISIS-K. So staying longer than we did would have made it even more dangerous for our people and would not have significantly changed the number of evacuees we could get out. So as we consider these tactical issues today, we must also ask ourselves some equally tough questions about the wider war itself and pause to think about the lessons that we've learned over the past 20 years. Did we have the right strategy? Did we have too many strategies? Did we put too much faith in our ability to build effective Afghan institutions, an army, an air force, a police force, and government ministries? We helped build a state, but we could not forge a nation. The fact that the Afghan army that we and our partners trained simply melted away, in many cases without firing a shot, took us all by surprise, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. We need to consider some uncomfortable truths. That we did not fully comprehend the depth of corruption and poor leadership in their senior ranks. That we did not grasp the damaging effect of frequent and unexplained rotations by President Ghani of his commanders. That we did not anticipate the snowball effect caused by the deals that the Taliban commanders struck with local leaders in the wake of the Doha Agreement. That the Doha Agreement itself had a demoralizing effect on Afghan soldiers. And that we failed to fully grasp that there was only so much for which and for whom many of the Afghan forces would fight. We provided the Afghan military with equipment and aircraft and the skills to use them. And over the years, they often fought bravely, and tens of thousands of Afghan soldiers and police officers died. But in the end,
Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Defense Secretary, offering a full-throated but candid defense of the botched military withdrawal by the United States from Afghanistan. As you heard in opening statements from the Democrat who chairs the House of Representatives Armed Services Committee and his Republican co-chair, the two political parties very much divided over the approach they're going to take in this hearing. And you could probably see there some of the members of the House of Representatives Armed Services Committee itching for an opportunity to ask questions of the commanders testifying before them. That chance will come soon. We'll keep watching that hearing for you. More highlights from it and all the rest of the day's other major stories coming up on WION World is One. I'm Simon Marks in Washington. I'll see you again tomorrow.
This is right, Arab.